a principle and a backbone is something to be admired. So definitely this is something that we will be raising on the floor of the Dáil. The other issue that I wanted to raise is the SNA so-called review, which is leading to huge cuts of SNAs from mainstream schools, to use that term. And the idea that there are children in mainstream classes who don't need help is just absolutely ridiculous. But to redeploy people from mainstream schools to special schools, it means that so many people who have their children in mainstream schools, they can only do so with that support anyway. That support will now be taken away. So they would then be looking for places in special schools that actually don't exist. But I've written to the Education Committee, which I'm a member of, asking for an urgent meeting where the NCSE will be brought in. Like, we're hearing reports of 5, 6 SNAs being lost from so many schools, and this review is only halfway through, and already it looks like about 200 at least SNAs will be redeployed. It's also taken expertise and experience out of schools as well, and the loss of that to schools is huge. Like, SNAs who've been in that school for 7 or 8 years will be shifted to somewhere else. I would call on Forza to take action about this on behalf of their own members and on behalf of parents and students. And, also the teaching unions as well should be taking a stand. And I think that this is something that I really welcome the protests which took place yesterday in Dublin. That's exactly the start we need. We need parents, we need teachers, and we need students and SNAs to come together and to oppose this, terrible move to take such support out of schools. This is penny pinching and cost cutting of the most disgraceful kind. And the NCSE should be called to account, but ultimately it is government policy. It's very easy to have a third party that you blame. They're following government policy, and I think it's really abhorrent. It's a terrible attack on additional needs education.
Yeah, I just want to cover some of the same ground. The school that was highlighted in the national media yesterday happens to be the primary school that I went to, Our Lady of Good Counsel National School in Johnstown, and I have met with the principal, the teachers, all of the SNAs affected, and parents in the aftermath of these drastic cuts, which are really, really severe. They had 9 SNAs, and that is being reduced to 3.8. So almost a 2/3 cut in the SNAs for the school. It is absolutely devastating for all concerned, for the SNAs, some of whom have worked there for in excess of 20 years, for the kids who... kids of every description, the kids who are now being excluded because they don't tick the box of so-called primary needs, but also those kids with those primary needs. I was talking to one parent this morning who was saying, well, his child needs insulin shots, which the SNA provides, but if the SNA is now having to cover loads of other bases, he doesn't know if his child is going to be able to go to school, because there's actually a risk. He described, and I'm using his words, a risk to his child's life. So these are devastating consequences. The teachers were also up in arms, because if you listen closely to what the minister is saying, she's saying the teachers are going to have to pick up the slack here. This is in teachers who are already in classes that are too big. They simply will not be able to manage. And the government are saying, something to do in their rather convoluted attempt to justify this. There was phrases used which sound good, like a sound bites, but if you actually think about them, they make no sense whatsoever, where the minister says the care needs of the children have changed. Have they? Have the care needs of the children changed? What's changed? Nothing has changed. And that's very obvious when you actually go and talk to the parents, to the SNAs and the teachers. They're the same kids. Their needs are exactly the same. And what's actually happening here is there's been a tightening of the criteria, and a whole layer of children are now being excluded. So this is the government abandoning the inclusion model for education. That's what's actually happening, and it is going to have devastating consequences. There's going to be protests. I can tell you the parents, the entire school community in my school are absolutely raging. And also another school, small school in Blackrock, they had one SNA and it's now gone. So now they've no SNAs. And so this is happening all over the country, and more to come. So there is going to be protests here next week. And I can tell the government, if they think that school communities are going to take this lying down, they have another thing coming. Secondly, just on the football also, as somebody who played football all my life and is a big supporter of football, we all want the Irish team to be participating in international competition. But it is very, very clear that Irish football has taken a principled stand and a clear stand in saying that they don't believe Israel should be part of the international footballing community. Over the vast majority, more than 90% of the clubs voted to have the FAI adopt this position that Israel should be put out of international football competitions. And rightly so, because Israel is guilty of genocide, ethnic cleansing, apartheid, occupation, and, among other things, and I really want to highlight this, what they have done among all the other horrific things that Israel has done over the last 2.5 years, and indeed before that, they've killed lots of young children who play soccer. And older people who play soccer, including children who came here. I was involved in bringing football teams to Ballybrack a few years ago from Gaza. Some of those children have been killed by Israel. So what's disgraceful in all of this is, whereas Irish football has made a clear statement about where it stands and about excluding this genocidal regime from international football, the Irish Taoiseach disgracefully says the match should go ahead. That's inexplicable that the Taoiseach would try and normalise a state that is guilty of genocide, of brutal occupation, of ethnic cleansing, and all I can do is commend Irish football. I mean, it shouldn't be, the pressure should not be on Irish football because they've made a clear statement. It should be UEFA, the Irish government should be imposing the sanctions necessary. In the last analysis, of course, I hope Irish football, if they're forced to be the ones who make this decision, will make the right decision and boycott Israel. But really, we'd like to see a change of tune from Micheál Martin and obviously of UEFA on this, and expel Israel, as was done with Russia, as was done with Yugoslavia in particular circumstances. Why on earth is Israel being given exceptional treatment when it's guilty of, frankly, horrendous atrocities against the Palestinian people?
Three things quickly. Just firstly, to add briefly on the issue of the SNAs. I mean, the overall point is what is being pursued very clearly is a model of exclusion instead of inclusion. It seems what's likely is, we pushed for and parents pushed for, and there was a big campaign to have additional special classes. The government announced there's going to be additional special classes. We welcomed that. We said there's not enough. But we said, where are you going to get the staff for these classes? Where are you going to get the teachers from? Where are you going to get the SNAs from? And now, effectively, I think we have our answer, is the government is moving SNAs around from mainstream classes into special classes, as opposed to recruiting the extra SNAs that we need. And the result is moving back towards a model of exclusion instead of inclusion. I was in a special school yesterday in my constituency, and what I found out was very interesting and suggests a wider problem, right? They were involved in this SNA review process. They are given all these parent questionnaires that are quite, intrusive, that parents are asked to fill out to establish their need for an SNA. The parents fill out these forms, and then this is all meant to be taken into account in assessing, do they have sufficient SNAs, do they need extra SNAs, or are they going to have their allocation reduced? But in this case, because of an administrative error, it seems, the questionnaires were never passed on to the board. Questionnaires weren't passed on, and the parents' consent form wasn't passed on. But nonetheless, they got a letter saying that your SNA allocation is going to be reduced from September, just like other schools, even though they couldn't have taken into account the parents' questionnaire forms because they didn't have the parents' questionnaire forms. They're still sitting in the principal's office. I saw them yesterday. The principal then contacted the board to say, wait a minute, you haven't taken into account these questionnaires that you've asked our parents to fill out. That's not an easy thing for parents to fill out. And then they say, oh, we don't actually need these questionnaires, even though they'd asked the parents to fill them out. And then they got a letter, which is very similar to the letter they originally got, but now they're not cutting their SNA allocation, effectively because they called out the fact that they didn't have the questionnaires, and how could they be making a decision on that basis. But they're not cutting it, but they're not agreeing to increase it, which is the request that was coming from the school. The second thing, quickly, is just to continue to pursue the issue of X, Grok, big tech, toxic algorithms. We hear this morning, and it's welcome, that the DPC is starting an investigation in terms of GDPR breaches, in terms of the production of child sexual abuse imagery and sexually abusive images of women. That is welcome, but I mean, it's not the first thing that you think of when you think, the production of child sexual abuse imagery. It's not the first law that is being broken is like GDPR laws. And the question remains, and I've asked this now in multiple forums, in multiple places, government ministers, is there a Garda investigation into X? They've literally refused to answer that question, and it leads me to believe that there is not a Garda investigation into X. They've repeatedly been asked, is there a Garda investigation into X? And what they talk about instead is, we've got all these number of individual complaints, but it seems to be the only thing they've spoken about as a factual thing is that there's complaints into these particular investigations into these particular complaints, which may be into the people who gave the prompt to Grok to generate these images, as opposed to investigations into X, into Grok itself. We've got our bill coming up 2 weeks' time to ban the toxic algorithms that shove this stuff, hateful material, pro-eating disorder material, pro-suicide material, really awful stuff, shove it down the throats of young people and adults. Our bill's coming up in 2 weeks' time. This is what we need to do. I really feel all this talk of banning children from social media is a distraction from actually this issue, which is to turn off the toxic algorithms. The Dublin Rape Crisis Centre has come out in opposition to this call to keep young people off social media. Instead, we need to make social media safe for all of us to be able to use. So turn them off for under 18s and turn them off by default for adults. And the final issue, quickly just to raise, is in relation to Cuba. The humanitarian crisis in Cuba is deepening. It is a consciously created humanitarian crisis by the Trump administration as part of a 6-decade-long international or US blockade of Cuba. It's an illegal international blockade, but they do it nonetheless. Pretty much every year the UN General Assembly comes out and says this blockade should be lifted, but it is being tightened against the Cuban people. They're the ones who are paying the price. And in that context, Ireland should be giving humanitarian aid, should be speaking out against this illegal blockade. But instead, you have Helen McEntee attending the Munich Security Conference and then afterwards saying, I was talking to people there, and you know what, we're going to consider boarding so-called Russian shadow fleet tankers in international waters. That's what the EEZ is, with no legal basis whatsoever. We're going to consider boarding them. And the context of this is the blockade of Cuba. And the fact that some of these ships are bringing oil to Cuba in the context where Trump is saying you can't have any oil, we're going to strangle the Cuban economy, we're going to strangle the Cuban people. And it's incredible. At a time when we know, it's a year and a half since they opened their examination of the flight through Irish airspace illegally, carrying weapons to Israel. Every time I do a PQ on it, I just get, oh no, we haven't completed our examination yet. I've given them the evidence. I handed it to Simon Harris after a leader's question. We know that. We know for a fact that the ICE is using Shannon Airport to deport Palestinians to a genocide, to deport Sudanese people into a genocide. We know how Shannon Airport is used by the US military. And the Irish government has just an approach of hear no evil, see no evil when it comes to all the evil deeds of the US empire.
Okay.